Welcome to the Disability and podcast, bringing together thoughtful discussion and debate. This month, Disability Arts Online's Digital Operations Manager Joe Turnbull chats with Artistic Director of Hijinx Theatre, Ben Pettitt-Wade, about their show, Meet Fred, which is currently on its 10th anniversary tour of the UK. If you are intending to see the show, please note that this podcast contains some spoilers. This podcast also contains some strong language.
Welcome to the Disability and podcast, everyone. My name's Joe Turnbull. I'm Digital Operations Manager at Disability Arts Online. And this month I'm joined by Ben Pettitt-Wade, who's Artistic Director of Hijinx. And Hijinx is a professional producing theatre company based in Cardiff, which works to pioneer, produce and promote opportunities for actors with learning disabilities and or autism. Welcome to the podcast, Ben. How are you doing?
Very good. Thank you, Joe.
I feel like I should ask you a silly random question. What did you have for your lunch today, Ben?
I had some udon noodles, actually. They were kind of instant, but not. I added some bits and bobs to them, and they were quite spicy.
I hate to use the word, but pimp noodles is definitely one of my go-to lunches. Just adding a few interesting bits to them. Great. So, Ben, if you could, it would be great if you could just start off by telling us a bit about yourself and your role at Hijinx, and specifically your role in Meet Fred, which is what is gonna be the focus of discussions for today.
So, as you said, I'm artistic director at Hijinx. I've been at Hijinx since 2007. And I've been in various different roles. I became artistic director, I think, in 2015. So I get to work with our wonderful artists in their training. So we have academies that train our artists across Wales. And then we explore the making of our productions and co-create our productions with those artists. And I get the pleasure of leading in terms of directing some of those shows in the room with the artists. And I also curate and program our biannual Hijinx Unity Festival. So I also kind of program that event. And Meet Fred is on its 10th anniversary tour. So it is a production we made it opened back in 2016. It was the first production that I kind of produced for the company as director, in my role as artistic director. And it was really, I think, the first production probably that came out of the training that we had set up. So these academies that we set up in 2012. It was the first kind of product, if you like, from that process of making work with our artists through that training.
Was it quite experimental in that sense then, when you were first sort of trialing that out in terms of the devising process?
I guess it was very much about exploring what this is to make a piece of theatre with the artists that we make theatre with, who are all learning disabled and or autistic. So yeah, I guess in that sense it is and was experimental. But it all started with puppetry. We hosted a workshop led by a puppetry company called Blind Summit, who are UK based in London. And they taught us and our artists their version of Bunraku puppetry, so a puppet that needs 3 puppeteers. And they're training puppets with these kind of cloth puppets that we got to work on. And it was through that experience, both observing how our artists approached it, but also for myself as an artist being inside that process as a puppeteer, that led me to want to explore further this form of puppetry with our artists. So what we did is we ordered a number of our own set of Bunraku training puppets from Blind Summit. And we spent 9 to 12 months in sessions kind of, experimenting with this form of puppetry. And in that we sort of we kind of honed our eye in terms of what worked on the puppet, what didn't work.
Did you have trained puppeteers in the room then? Or were you just actually people who didn't have experience?
We just sort of took what we learned from that week's workshop And then we incorporated that into the training with our artists. So it was very, it hit and miss, if you like. But so we learned through successes and failures. But during that process of working with the puppet, the story started to take shape. So this relationship that a puppet has with its puppeteers, in that it doesn't, without its puppeteers, in essence, a puppet doesn't exist. It doesn't have life. And then the parallel between that and the reliance that some of our artists have on a support network around them to be able to live their life to the full, to remain independent, to travel, to be with us in our sessions, that parallel became apparent. So that's what we started to explore. But we only found that because we had started with the puppetry. At the time of making the show back then, there was austerity was the buzzword, and a lot of our artists were experiencing directly the cuts that were happening and changes to PIPs and their benefits, disability living allowance benefits specifically. And there was a lot of anxiety, and it was having, obviously an impact, not just with our artists, but disabled people across the UK. So that then kind of started to become part of the story, because the way in which we make work, it's all via improvisations, and some of the situations that were being suggested that we could put Fred in were very much from the life experiences of the artists that were together making the show. One example being the visit that Fred has to make to a job centre. That scene was directly inspired by someone's own experience of going to the job centre and the sort of threats that they were put under in terms of potential cuts to their benefits if they didn't fulfil certain requirements linked to that.
Must have been quite a eureka moment, actually, stumbling on that parallel. I bet it all became yeah
it was. I think that was it did it. I think as soon as that became apparent, that it was suddenly like, okay, we've got something here that could make a really interesting show. And it's that thing of being able to explore something, but not explore it directly, but take a puppet in this example and be able to use that to kind of satirize the subject matter, which I think then really helps to kind of show it for what it is, which is, a really screwed up situation, Kafkaesque in essence, when you're dealing with these kind of bureaucratic processes.
There's something that, because it's a puppet, makes it sort of comedic, right? The situations, which I suppose means you can go to those darker places and stuff like that, because you've got that sort of slightly comedic foil.
It's two-handed, isn't it? So it's both allowing us to explore it with a kind of dark elements of humor and comedy, but also not allowing it to be too dark, if that makes sense. So allowing it to kind of, I think it'd be a very different show if it was just humans, performing the piece. There's something really interesting when we perform it, is the level of empathy people have for Fred as a puppet. And I think there's always a question of whether, if it hadn't been a puppet, whether it would affect the audience in the same way, whether they'd feel the same empathy for that character.
Was there any trepidation around, I suppose, the concept of just of presenting disabled people as puppets? So, I don't know.
It is a good question. We've always been, when we were making the show, very clear that, in our minds at least, that Fred is a puppet. So the way he experiences the world is as a puppet. We didn't have in our minds Fred is a disabled puppet necessarily, but it was the simple fact that for Fred to be part of the world, the real world, there were certain barriers in his way, which then lead to him, obviously, then he is, I guess, based on the societal model of disability, that is what is disabling him. But very much in our minds, it was about exploring it as a puppet. And it just happened that, you put a puppet in real situations, clearly there are going to be barriers. And we played with lots of things. Like when we were making the show, we took him out on the street. We saw how people responded to him, simply sitting on a bench, asking people for directions, and we played with stuff like that. booking a table in a restaurant and then turning up with a puppet and seeing how difficult it was simply to just get to a table, with 3 puppeteers around you. It was explored via puppet and puppetry rather than directly thinking actually as Fred as a disabled person or character or puppet.
I suppose we've already talked around it a little bit. For anyone who's not seen the show, do you want to give any more of a sort of a bit more of a brief synopsis about what it is?
Yeah, so meet Fred. In the show, you get to meet Fred. And Fred is a 2-foot tall cloth puppet who's controlled by 3 puppeteers. Fred wakes up at the start of the show without really realizing he's in a show. So the opening scene is kind of between Fred and the director, who's also a character in the show, who has to explain to Fred that what's happening, why the people are here in the audience, and kind of asks him questions about, what he wants to be, what he sees his life being like. And Fred has certain ideas, like he wants to kind of live a regular life. He wants to meet a girl, get married, get a job, these sorts of societal ideas around what a inverted commas mark normal life might be. As such, he's then sent to the job centre where he meets Jack, the job centre guy, who informs him that he needs to take one of 3 jobs in order to keep his puppeteers, because if he doesn't take a job, he's going to have his PLA reduced, his puppetry living allowance. So that's the first kind of trip up in his story. And other things happen, like he goes on a date. That's also a disaster for him. And basically everything starts to go wrong from the top of the show. Things just start to go wrong for Fred. He takes a job as a children's entertainer. That's, he behaves awfully in that during the scene, which then leads to him losing that job, which then leads to him losing one of his puppeteers. And then the final kind of, I guess, elements of that storyline in the show, we see Fred driven to the point that he's attempting to commit suicide. At which point there's a character, his maker, the designer, appears and really kind of, I guess, gives him some quite tough advice about being himself, fighting for himself and fighting for what he wants, which then kind of he starts to do. But it's a little complicated because there's a play within a play, so it's a very meta storyline. So throughout the show also, there's these exchanges with the director and the stage manager, who's also part of the show. And there's conflict, I guess, between who has control over the show, over his life, in some ways over the process of making a show like this as well, over what it means to kind of try and co-create or devise a show with a group of artists, and particularly this group of artists, and some of the, I guess, conflict that created during the process is represented within the storyline of the show and Fred's life as well.
Fred must have quite a special place in your heart, or certainly the show must, with it being the first show that you produced in this way and as the artistic director. It's been 10 years since then. I wondered if you could let us in on some of the highs and lows really over that 10-year cycle of the show, if there's been any highlights from the run, or if there were any lows. I don't know. I would be interested to hear about them as well, but feel free to just talk about the highs.
I think what's incredible for us is that the show, still has the same impact on audiences, 10 years later. It's been an incredible journey for all of us that made the show together and what the places it's been able to take us.
It's been internationally, hasn't it?
Oh yeah, we've traveled all over with it.
Was it China?
We've been to China, we've been to Japan, South Korea, US, and then all over Europe. I mean, I don't know how many countries it's been to now, but I think when we made it back in 2016, we couldn't have dreamed that it would have seen the success it has and taken us to the places it has. And some of the opportunity to travel has been pretty special, not just for myself, but the entire kind of team. I don't think any of us, without having been part of the show, would have had that opportunity to go to some of these places, which is, in terms of the types of experiences that offers for us and our artists, it's been pretty unique in that way. We made a Korean version of the show in 2024. So that was a really big moment for us to kind of go and work with the production company over there to cast it, to meet both puppeteers but also disabled artists in Seoul that were able to fulfill the roles in the Korean version of the production, and then open that in autumn 24. And for those artists that were part of that show, certainly the disabled artists, I mean, that was their first professional engagement, in any production. So that was a really nice kind of, I guess, legacy of the show to leave in Korea.
Mm.
I mean, lows, just keeping it going sometimes, even on a tour that like we're on at the moment. It's a small scale production, and what that generally means is most places we're doing single nighters, and that can get very exhausting. It's not easy doing that type of touring and doing it
No.
extensively.
I mean, the logistics of traveling internationally with a group of artists who probably haven't traveled much and actually probably haven't performed much, certainly internationally, they must have been quite something.
Yeah, I mean, certainly we've just kind of jumped into all that stuff in some ways, and people did just kind of grow into it. I mean, the team that we have touring with this production now have such experience of touring internationally. They just take it all in their stride, even when you go to a place like China, which is, so different culturally to here. They kind of loved that element of visiting new and exciting places.
There's a very British specific context to this, and especially around the puppet living allowance. This. I wonder how that cultural translation might be quite strange in some of those contexts. I guess was there any hint of that, or it'd be interesting to hear about that.
I think wherever you go, it's about a fight against the system. So there's that universal kind of theme, and people root for whoever has that kind of fight in them that's going against. It's like a David and Goliath type setup. But wherever you go, I think there's a tinge of recognition, even though the system might be structured slightly differently, of the kind of barriers that people face because of systems, specifically when it comes to disability. Yeah, even though there's not maybe the exact translation to our own system here, we found that wherever we go, that people recognize that.
Because it's puppetry as well, there's a lot of non-verbal stuff going on there. That's just, I guess, the gags and the key moments will be part of the sort of the physicality of how Fred moves or can't move when he's as his help is sort of stripped back and stuff as well. So that probably levels the sort of the cultural differences a little bit in some way.
And people love the kind of British humour feel of it as well. That's a kind of universal sort of selling point often for audiences outside the UK, which we'd certainly lean into in the show. I mean, sometimes the most difficult things to translate often is the swearing. So Fred does swear a fair bit in the show, and there's some creative swearing in there. And culturally, we found that can be difficult to kind of find direct translation for, especially when you're in places like Korea or Japan. We're always having to spend some time to dig out what the most appropriate translation might be for some of that.
But is that form of puppetry a Japanese invention?
Yeah, bunraku is a very traditional form, originally from Japan.
I suppose there was that cultural key in that context, although I don't know whether that was a factor or not to it going to Japan, really.
We've always been really keen to take the show to Japan because of that. And it's just a wonderful place, a wonderful country. But the bunraku puppetry connection was kind of really important for us. But it is a very different form, I guess. We've taken it quite far from that traditional, traditional bunraku puppetry. We went to see a piece when we were in Osaka at the National Puppet Theatre. It's kind of treated like opera or ballet in some ways. So I think it's UNESCO protected. art form.
Right. Yeah.
So I think we were slightly nervous in some ways to see how this piece would be received there. Actually, it was absolutely fine, and people didn't have any issues with us taking liberties with their their form of puppetry. Yeah.
Yes, with their cultural iconic. Hey, those udon noodles you had for lunch are feeling very on brand now, though, so that's good.
Absolutely. Yeah. Still kind of trying to recreate here. Brilliant time we had in Japan. Yeah.
Has the story adapted or changed in the 10 years?
We talked about this quite a bit, of whether we would need to adapt or change it, because things in terms of the benefit system have changed in some ways. Terminology has changed. We decided against making changes because, actually, but as Fred describes it in the show, the situation is still a fuck barrel for many. And there's one section of the show where the director really spells it out for Fred exactly why he can't be paid, which is the essence of the argument Fred has in the show, because of the impact it would have on his own benefits, his puppetry living allowance. And that's still true, I think, for many of our artists that we work with. There are limits on the amount we're able to pay people, often because of the specific benefits they're on. And the show's very open about that. But things have changed. I'm happy to say everyone in the show now, is on equal pay and paid fair and rightly. So it's better in that sense, but not fully there. But then things seem to have shifted now to access to work becoming a real issue. What we say in the show is completely relevant right now in terms of the threats and the changes taking place with access to work and the complete dysfunctionality of that particular system. So yeah, we talked about it at length, and that we decided, we're just going to keep it as is, because also the situation that Fred faces is very much in show. We've adapted DWP to Department of Work and Puppets, and we've adapted what was disability living allowance to puppetry living allowance, but it still all made sense in that way.
Was there plans for this latest tour already afoot before the latest attacks on disabled people's benefits?
We started to make plans for it at the time that the Labour government, as it is now, first started to talk about visiting the potential of making cuts to the benefit system. So that was around about, 12, 18 months ago. So that was one of the reasons we started to plan it and put in our applications and all that kind of thing, to try and use it as a way of promoting conversation and awareness of the situation. For some of the dates on this tour, we've teamed up with Diverse City and Extraordinary Bodies based down in Bristol, and we've hosted a couple of Q&As with them to speak directly about the impact of changes to access to work and the impact the benefit system has on disabled artists. So we had a Q&A in Plymouth after our performances there, and we just had one last week in Bristol that was specifically about that.
And what was the reception to those like? Was there a lot of interest in that?
For both, we had a good portion of the audience that would stay behind the show to listen to that and ask questions afterwards. And the feedback we got, that it really opened up things for people who didn't necessarily have that awareness or knowledge at all of these situations, and the impact it's having specifically on artists. So I think in that sense, it's a small scale studio touring production, so we're only reaching so many people. But even if we're raising awareness and impacting a small number, it's still hopefully in some way helping out there.
No, yeah, but it's just interesting that if a sort of, I don't want to say general, but a more general theatre going audience might stay behind to hear about that, I think is actually really interesting. I mean, so, because the impact is so big and the potential impact, and because it's so dysfunctional at the minute, all of our access to work related content is actually hugely popular, and there's a massive demand from it, certainly from the disabled community and within the arts. I think there is a growing recognition about how big an impact, the loss of access to work would be on the. I mean, we don't know what it will be, but certainly the impact would be massive if there's major changes that do eventually end up coming through. Is there, in that 10-year stretch since it first started, are there any sort of broader things that you think you sort of observed of change for disabled people, whether in the arts or wider than that?
Things have absolutely in 10 years changed. I feel like, when we first started touring in 2016, things like Ramps on the Moon really had only just kind of kicked off. In general, there's more interest from venues and theatres for this type of work now than maybe there was originally back in 2015, 16. And that's got to be beneficial, I think, for disabled artists, but also attitudes within the funders, within arts councils, England and Wales. I think in 2016, you couldn't even apply additionally for artist access costs as part of your applications. And that has been a massive change for us as well, in terms of how we're able to support our artists in work and on tour, and kind of circumnavigate in some ways the access to work processes on some projects, and for it not to have an impact on our budgets. Because I think one of our arguments back then was that as a company producing the work with the artists that we co-create with, there's a 15-20% additional cost to any project that we're managing, and that not necessarily being fair when you look at other companies that don't kind of have the same, I guess, diversity in terms of how they work and cast and make their work. So being able to separate that out in applications now is for an organization like us is a huge difference, and I think is a positive step that wasn't there 10 years ago. What's becoming worse? I think everything just is tighter now. There's less. There just seems economically we're in a really tricky moment. Politically, we're in a really tricky moment, and I think all of that filters down to reducing opportunity for artists and disabled artists, kind of specifically, which is why we're talking about the changes to access to work and all that kind of thing. It's all part of that.
What about the work that's being made, particularly sort of with learning disabled artists, collaborators, or as even sort of creative leads on things? Do you think do you think there's been a step change in that? Have you noticed? I mean, I don't know how much. I presume you must like see shows by other companies a fair bit and stuff, or at least have an awareness of. Do you think there's been anything there that's sort of piqued your interest, I suppose?
I'd say yes. There's certainly more. I mentioned the Unity Festival, which we run earlier. We kind of introduced that in 2008, and at that time, there was very little opportunity for companies like ourselves to perform in kind of theatres that maybe, I don't like the term mainstream, but theatres that have stages like the Wales Millennium Centre, which is where we host the festival. It's very difficult without an event like a festival to get access to those sorts of spaces at that time. I look around now, and actually there are more commonly part of theatres and venues programs work that is certainly representative and of learning disability and or autism. I mean, the Perfect Play for Rachel that's just touring at the moment is one example of that, and picking up great reviews. And I would love to have that at a festival like ours at Unity Festival, but it's completely out of our range of what we can bring in because of the scale of it, which is great. Because actually that sort of ambition, I'm not sure it was there, 10 years ago, that you'd see a show like that performing on the stages that show's performing on.
We had Zuko on the podcast not too long ago, actually. So yeah, it's good to see some of that sort of starting to come through. If you had sort of one key message or thing you've learned from the whole run of Meet Fred, and it could be from the sort of research or devising process, or it could be from the touring it or anything like that. If there was one thing you kind of share with listeners, can you think what it would be?
Make sure if you're going on a tour, like the sort of touring that we've been doing with this show for 10 years, that you bring with you your own bottle of hot sauce.
Okay. Yeah.
Tabasco, I would call it, because
Yeah,
it
Tabasco,
just helps
nice.
to kind of just reduce a bit of blandness from some of the
Sure.
Premier Inn breakfasts you might be having along the way. One question I get is like often is, how do you even get to the point that, because this particular tour, I think we're going to 35 venues. There's 67 shows or something across those 35 venues, and it's January to end of April or mid-April. So it's quite an extensive kind of tour. So I often get asked, how do you even like get a tour like that in place? How do you get it booked? Because that's a lot of people to talk to. And in terms of trying to put a piece like this on the road, you have to be really tenacious in terms of when you're talking to venues to kind of get everything booked in. So anyone out there, I guess, who's trying to stage their own work and put it out there in the world, don't give up. Just keep banging on at people because they won't reply to emails. Everyone's very busy and don't expect to reply straight away, but don't be shy about just keep nudging and keep nudging and keep nudging. And eventually people will get back. And don't be afraid to pick up the phone. If you're not getting an answer, even if it means just leaving an answer phone message, in general, if someone hears an answer phone message and hears your voice, they'll reply, even if it's a no. And sometimes it's useful just to hear a no, so you can stop banging on about it to them.
A no is better than no response, right? That's what I always say in the pitching journalism world.
Be determined. And I think we've always had that kind of determination. Although, in general, with this show, we've been very lucky and we haven't had to sell it that much outside the UK. So we just rely on inquiries coming in without having to push it. It's only when we're touring the UK we really have to kind of push it and get on the phones to people.
That's slightly damning in its own way, isn't it? Oh dear. Yes. I mean, it's something quite nice about the fact, going right back to the devising and the initial inception of the show, that just getting people together in a room and playing around with a particular medium and something an idea presents itself is quite a nice sort of learning. There's it can be okay to just go in with no agenda sometimes, right, and see where it goes.
Trust that something's going to come, and that is the way we tend to kind of approach most of our projects, so that we don't tend to start with an idea. It tends to be starting with the people in the room and seeing what comes from that, often exploring a particular genre or style or route into it. Yeah.
That's quite interesting, actually. Yeah, that's almost become a method. That it's, you're kind of working with what you've got in the room, and not bringing too much outside ideas, preconceptions of what it might be.
Yeah,
it's a very particular way of working, isn't it?
I think so. I mean, it's not writer-led, I guess.
No.
We I have done productions that have with the writer, and that's great, and that's been a great experience. But I try to kind of just, I guess, I see my role as a director and deviser is about collecting collectively what a group of people in a space want to make, and what the ideas are that are coming through that. So often I don't find it useful to kind of have these kind of sessions where we actually just sat trying to think of ideas. It's more about exploring a process and an approach to making a piece of work, which then bleeds into the ideas. We're very lucky in some ways because of how we're set up with our training. So we're able to use our training as a way to work with our artists. But then we have an ensemble as well that sits now separate from our training, which includes some of our artists who are still in training, but then they're paid separately to really kind of work with us on R&D towards the delivery of our productions. So there's a kind of dual process, both within training and then now separately within these R&D specific weeks where we focus on a production.
Do you want to say any more about that?
Yeah, I mean, it's something we introduced. We've had it. So we're now in the second year of that happening. But I think it was an acknowledgement that it's great to be able to explore with our artists as part of their training our productions, but actually what we want to be able to do is also pay them for that knowledge and time and expertise, and have a really focused group of artists that are able to consider, I guess, some of the wider ramifications of what it is to produce a production as well. We speak about, what it means to make an application for a production, what it means to book a tour, what it means to make a piece of work for a particular audience that we're trying to create something for. So it's having a wider understanding of theatre making.
Does that mean that any of your artists who do perform in a sort of finished production will have been through the training process? Is that correct?
Pretty much all, yeah.
Yeah. And so everyone's sort of starting on a similar, at least means everyone's got the same sort of grounding, which is a good place to be, isn't it?
That's exactly it. The academies were set up in recognition that for our artists, it isn't really a reality that they would go to drama school or to university and study in that way, in a very traditional kind of form. And so it was very much a way to be able to train them to know what the expectations would be then when they came into our rehearsal spaces or found work outside of Hijinx as well. So it is very much kind of preparation so that they are able to enter those spaces on an equal footing to someone who might have had the opportunity to go to college or university or drama school.
That's really interesting. And does that training within the academy settings, does that include, is it focused purely on stage skills, or is there any off stage, that kind of thing to it as well? Or
it's mostly on stage, yeah. It's mostly performance skills at present. I think what we struggle with, there is some interest amongst our artists in terms of learning backstage, for example, skills. We do some screen acting training as well as part of that. But in terms of the backstage areas, it's difficult for us because we don't own or manage our own building.
Yeah,
I think the ambition would be to be able to provide that type of opportunity, but it never really worked out for us because of not having that control. I think if there was our own building, and certainly, that hopefully one day that might be a reality, you never know. But that would allow us to be able to provide that opportunity as well, yeah.
I know that Birds of Paradise up in Scotland are currently sort of at the start of a new program of work, which is all focused on backstage and those kind of skills. So it'd be interesting to see kind of what emerges from that, really, and whether there's a model that can be taken from there, and hopefully it creates a sort of pipeline for those kind of roles, for disabled people to do those sorts of roles.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Do you think Fred is ever going to collect his state pension, or is he just on the treadmill of benefits hell forever?
Is he on the treadmill of benefits together? It's a difficult question to answer. It's kind of existential, isn't it? Because he only exists for the purposes of the show. So in some ways, probably yes, because at the show, it has this kind of secular structure in that he starts at the very start of the show. He's kind of taken from his box and laid out on a flight case, which is his little stage, I guess. And then at the end of the show, he's kind of dropped in the box quite unceremoniously, and in that, that is his life cycle, if you like. and each show he wakes up again and he has no memory of the previous show.
Okay.
So it's kind of he's in a complete nightmare Groundhog Day type situation. So he would really have to break out of the show to kind of to get even to experience that.
It was a bit of a facetious question, to be honest, but it was partly a will the show tour forever and ever and ever, but also I suppose it would be interesting if Fred as a character might ever step outside of the vehicle of Meet Fred, seeing as he's been such a staple for Hijinx. I don't know. I'm just I'll put those two to you.
He does occasionally, he's very useful as a character sometimes for social media type content and bits of videos and stuff. We've had some fun over the years creating some of that with Fred. and it gives that extra material, if you like, outside of the actual performance, which is nice. But I don't know what retirement would for Fred would look like. I mean, in honesty, if the show goes on much longer, he's simply going to disintegrate physically, in all likelihood, unfortunately, because he's pretty threadbare now. But somehow he's still managing to, yeah, just about keep it together.
He could always join your board of trustees.
Oh my God, I would never. That would be awful. I'd be gone. I mean, he hates the show. He just hates it. He's the one person who doesn't enjoy any of this travel and getting to go and visit lovely places.
Sure.
So I think if he was to join the board, that would be my days numbered.
Fair enough. Yeah, I wondered if you wanted to say any more about any other projects that you're working on at Hijinx, or more broadly outside of the Meet Fred tour. If there's other stuff you've got on the horizon that you'd like to preface or talk about.
Just very busy a lot of the time, it seems. So we're just preparing for our Hijinx Unity Festival. It's going to be taking place in June, July. So we've got a couple of satellite events. We do kind of a day event in Llanelli on the 25th of June, and then a day in North Wales at Theatr Clwyd on the 27th of June. And then we have a week of events down here in Cardiff at the Wales Millennium Centre and Chapter Arts Centre from the 1st to the 5th of July. So that's it has a studio programme that takes place at the Western Studio at Wales Millennium Centre. And then we have a kind of big programme of outdoor and free street performance over the weekend of the 4th and 5th of July, again around the Millennium Centre. But it's an international programme, so there's a lot of artists, disabled artists, but inclusive theatre companies and dance companies as well from across Europe.
And do you know who they are going to be yet?
Just about. So it's people like Tanzbar Bremen, who are a company from Germany. They're a fantastic dance company. They're bringing a couple of pieces for the outdoor programme. Collectivo Clohart, who are Italian company. Blaumia Atelier, again from Germany. Theatre Tikva, quite a big German programme this year, who are from Berlin. Danza Mobile from Sevilla. Oh, and a fantastic piece by Belgium circus company called ADM, or it's À 2 Mètres is the name of the piece. And that's a kind of two-hander on it with a Chinese pole. Yeah, so there's a kind of variety of theatre, street theatre, circus, music.
Get your train and hotels for Cardiff booked for them, listeners.
Although
to my shame, I've never been. I've read and heard about the festival quite a lot, extensively in my, funnily enough, 10 years I've been at Disability Arts Online now as well. But I've never been, to my shame. So maybe this is the year.
That would be great. That would be great. We'd love to have you. We do have like an artist exchange event that's on the Friday, the 3rd of July. That's kind of which we're running in collaboration with Cultural Bridge, who fund connections between UK and Germany. What's interesting with the festival is that that is one, as an organisation, that's one of the ways in which we've managed to grow internationally as well, external to Fred happening. But Fred kind of went hand in hand with it because it brought us into contact with a lot of different companies like our own, making similar sort of work across Europe, which then led us to travelling to visit festivals that some of them were running. And now we have this kind of network, if you like, of like-minded organisations with similar ethoses that we kind of see each other quite a bit across the festival circuit over the summer, with our festival being part of that.
Yeah. It's good to have an international circuit like that. Is so valuable.
Mm.
Oh, well, Ben, thanks so much for your time today. It's been great to have you on and to hear more. It's a shame we couldn't hear from Fred, I suppose, but
he's off. Where is he today? He's in Brecon, I think, today. Oh, so he'll be in his box in the back of a van somewhere, I expect, at the moment.
I thought you might have said he's on annual leave. He's taking some time out.
Yeah.
Or maybe something more nefarious, knowing Fred, probably, right?
I mean, if he was left up to his own devices, I'm sure, yeah.
Well, on that bombshell, Ben Pettitt-Wade, it was great to have you on the show. And thanks for joining us. And all of you, thanks for listening. And we'll see you next time.
Thanks, Joe. Take care.
Thank you for listening. We do hope you've enjoyed this episode of Disability And. Further episodes of Disability And can be found through the Disability Arts online website at www.disabilityarts.online.